This is Anchored and Devoted. I'm Pastor Joseph, and
hey, I'm Pastor Jer. Hello.
And we are excited to mess up your day by bringing you something that will challenge you, hopefully, to be obedient to God by getting in His Word and actually doing it. So there you go.
That's it.
Today, I tagged the topic as how to love your neighbor when your neighbor's not so lovable.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be your neighbor in your house, the neighbor in your community, the neighbor across the street, like
the neighbor sharing your bedroom.
It could be. I hope that at least looking at the story of the Good Samaritan, that we do take some time to realize that, at least in the context of the story, the neighbor was someone who was very different than them. And so I want to start off by challenging us to recognize that the Good Samaritan, the one who was the outcast, was the one who actually did the good work. Often we think of ourselves as the one doing the good work and not realizing we might need saving or need help. And so how do we love our neighbor well? I think first requires us to say, again, who is our neighbor? And
sure.
I believe that our neighbors are the ones who don't look like us, don't sound like us, and often don't agree with us. So that is the one I'm called to love.
Okay. I think it's a good definition when we're talking about applying the scripture, because I think that's what Jesus was driving at here. That's what the disciples, or rather the scribes and the Pharisees, seemed to be hoping that Jesus would give them a loophole on when they said, yes, "Who is my neighbor?"
Yes.
They were like, is it 2 houses down? Or does it go as far as 4 houses down? And Jesus is like, yeah, you're in the wrong zip code.
Exactly. This is for the day. We're looking at Jews in a space living under Roman law. And as you stated, Jared, they're looking for their neighbor to be another Jew who they disagree with. Mm-hmm. Whereas this is, in the story of the Good Samaritan, the parable, we see the priest is not going to stop. I don't know if he's too busy or what, but I assume he's got some good holy work to do.
Phil somewhere. Yeah.
He's got some good holy work to do. And so he needed to keep moving and not actually help the individual who was in front of him. And then we see another leader of the faith come through and realize that he doesn't have the space or the bandwidth or the margin to engage with this individual that is hurt, because there could be many reasons. And yet the one who was looked down upon is the one who stops to help and sacrifices by putting him up for care after getting him to a place of, or at least where care can be administered.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when it comes to loving the person who is prickly, or I just flat out disagree with, how do we do it well?
I think we talked about this back in season 1, because I think we talked about this topic some in an episode or 2 back then. And one of the things that I want to give a shout back to is some research that was done where individuals in seminary were given a task to write specifically to prepare a teaching on the Good Samaritan, on this text. Mm-hmm. And along the way, they were told that they needed to be at a particular place by a particular time in order to present their paper. That some of them were told but the larger majority, at least if not without exception, those who believed that they were running late in this experiment passed by someone who clearly was in need on their way to their destination. The research was set up, in other words, so that after preparing a teaching on this text, on their way to go present this teaching, they were presented with the scenario where there is someone traveling who is hurt and in need of help. And the researchers watched to say, will they stop? And what they found was that even though they had the entire thing in their mind as they were going about this, the entire scenario was fresh because they were preparing to teach positively on how to be like the Good Samaritan. When presented with it, if they believed they were late, the truths that they were about to teach got jettisoned for the schedule. And this made me think of something else. And that's that we are called human beings, not human doings. And one of the things that you said the other day when we were talking is we have to look for the opportunities. We have to look for the moments where what we need to do is just hit pause, like hit a hard pause, and be prepared for our schedule to be totally blown up. Because many times in life, these opportunities that we're presented with, whether it's someone who's being hard or someone who is fallen hard times, the thing that drives us is often not, am I a relational person living in a relational world to invest in a relationship, but what's the next thing on my task list? What's the next thing I got to punch out? What's the next thing I got to knock out? Now, that's for Good Samaritan kind of things. That's not for neighbor kind of things. Like in neighbor things, I think the same principle does apply. Because the question is still, what's the purpose of me and you being here when we're not like each other, when we're so different that we can't call ourselves community? We can call ourselves parts of different tribes. And the things that you do, the food you eat, I don't like it. It's too spicy. It's got too much salt. And the food I eat's too bland. And the clothes you wear are too bright. And the clothes I wear are too baggy. And we can go down the list of all these things that easily identify not just that we are different, but that we have different preferences. And these preferences are something that we can all of a sudden take a stand on. And that's before we get into anything ideological. You serve these gods and I serve those gods, and your gods just destroyed my grandparents and my gods destroyed your great grandparents. And we've been going back and forth for a long time over this thing. At the bottom of that is still the question, why are we here? Are we here to fulfill and to satisfy our needs, our desires, or are we made for relationship? And I'm going to push forward here to say, since we are made for relationship, do we recognize that we are made for eternal relationship, not predominantly temporal relationship? Because if I'm walking around recognizing that what I've been designed for is eternal relationship, that changes the way that I bump into you. That changes the way that I respond to you when you cut me off and flip me the bird. That changes the way I respond to you when you put up a house-sized placard for your favorite politician who I think is the devil. It necessitates that I slow down and that I recognize that that is not what is primary here. What's primary here is that you were made in God's image. He loved you as a part of this world and sent his son. And he's called me to be his ambassador with his message of reconciliation. And anything of my preferences that I let get in the way, or anything of my standing as God in judgment over you that I let get in the way of lovingly pursuing you with that message, well, that's become my sin.
I love that you pointed out that there's a need that is not focused on food or clothing or taste in music, but the need is for love. And that need is real, just as the need for an eternal relationship with God is real. And that cannot be and should not be undone by preference, party affiliation, or even things that we identify with outside of Christ.
Right.
So when it comes to how do we love our neighbor well, we have to keep Christ first in our eyes so that we can do it genuinely in a way that presents him, not just being nice to sell them Christianity or to beat them into Christianity.
Right.
We have to be willing um, to be vulnerable. And so I do think, and you said something, I think part of it is just getting to know the person as a person and knowing that it's okay to disagree, that I can listen to them and allow them to be heard, to be known, and to respect them just so that they can hear and see the truth of who Christ is in me. Um, there is a need, there is a hurt that only God can address. And I have to give people the opportunity to get past the things that they might not like about me so they can see that I am um, going to love them, period. And I'm not going to allow for the distractions of the world to deny that opportunity. I think the tough thing is, when you're looking at something um, or you're looking at an individual and they're not ready yet. And again, how do I love them when it might take them 5 or 6 years and my job is just to love them in this season? I think recognizing that uh, in your relationship with God, God will grow you in loving them. Um, you know, you want to grow in patience, you have to be around things that typically test it. And so um, it's okay to get uncomfortable with God and to know that that is a space for growing and not just dying or being still.
For sure. You know what I find really interesting about the parable of the Good Samaritan is that Jesus tells the parable of the Good Samaritan to answer the question, who is my neighbor? And when he gets to the end of the parable, he turns back to the Pharisees and he says, so which one was the neighbor? And they say the Pharisee. And we're like, well, of course they do that. I'm sorry, they say the Samaritan. And we say,
Yes.
of course they say the Samaritan because, and what we forget is the question they were asking was, who do I have to love?
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus didn't answer the question, who do you have to love? Jesus answered the question, the neighbor is the one who is neighborly. That's where this turns for me. Because my neighbor is not the person who is near me. My neighbor is a person who I have chosen to look at and say, I am a neighborly person, therefore you are my neighbor. I am a hospitable person, therefore you are welcome here. I am a generous person, therefore you will receive from me. It's not a question of who am I close enough to or who's in this proximity or who deserves. The question, who then is my neighbor? Jesus points a finger and says, it's either you or it's not you. That's what we have to wrestle with here. This question of how do I live with my neighbor when my neighbor is not being loving? Well, the answer, in a way, is quite simple. Very easily, because if you're being the neighbor, then the fact that they're not being lovable doesn't change you. You might have to have a fence. You might have to say, hey, buddy, I need you to go back to your yard. I need you to stop cursing at 3 a.m. because my family's trying to sleep. And you might have to call the police and say, hey, I need to put a restraining order here. But it's not the same as saying, hey, buddy, I no longer look at you through the lens of love. I'm now going to respond to you based on who you are. That's what's off limits here. What Jesus says is no. You respond to them out of who I have made you to be.
Which then leads to invitations to your table.
That's correct.
Which leads to invitations to experience life together and to see the difference that Christ has done in your life. So part of that invitation is to hear the story of each other. And that is a precious thing because you're giving time to the other. Yep. That is what differs when we see the story of this other, this Samaritan, who has experienced being an other, being able to challenge the Pharisees in how they live out love. Is it actually genuinely meeting people where they are in their hurt, or is it passing them by as they're hurting? If we're passing them by, then we're missing the moment. Because as you stated, Jared, we are eternal. And the reality is, if I can see something and don't engage, then I'm missing the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so I am, as you stated, sinning. I'm hurting myself by not slowing down to help, by not loving well.
I want to put a finer point on than even I'm hurting myself. What you're doing is fracturing yourself from God. You're fracturing yourself from the one in whose image you've been made and redeemed. When we do that, we hurt ourselves because we cut ourselves away from God. And when we do that, we cut ourselves away from life. And that can only rebound to us in loss, in pain, in separation. We are neighborly because God looked down on us and decided, you're my people. I'm going to take care of you because that's who I am. And we turned around and said, why, yes, we are. So thank you very much. We deserve it. And then we turn around again and do the same thing towards other people. And God said, tap the brakes. You missed it. I am going to love you because I am loving. I'm going to be your father because I've chosen to make you my children. No, you didn't get born in my house. I pulled you kicking and screaming in from the street. I made up a bed for you here. I set a seat at my table for you. I made the food for you out of my pantry. And I invited you to come and eat with me and to be my child. You didn't do anything to get here. I, in fact, had to carry you in. If we were having received that, this is one of the things I tell my kids often. Because, my kids constantly turn and will receive something good and then immediately turn around and do something mean to one of their siblings. And I'm constantly saying to them these days, you have freely received, so freely give it. You think I'm going to run out of things to do for you? You think I'm going to run out of ways to be kind to you, to be loving to you, to care for you, to provide for you? I freely gave that to you. Freely give it to them. But I can say that to them because I've seen it in my life, and I need that said to me probably a whole lot more than they need to hear it themselves.
We've got a lot of homework.
More than I want to admit to.
I'm just saying, it is easy to blame my neighbor. It's easy to blame the person on the side of the road with a flat tire and rationalize that they didn't take care of their car or whatever, and not realize that God wants to do something in the moment, both in our weakness and in theirs. There's an opportunity for growth as opposed to seeing it as a burden or a distraction, when the real distraction is our busyness. We've got work to do.
Yep. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I want to thank you guys for coming and hanging out with us on this fine day. I hope you have a great day ahead of you. I hope that you are not in need of someone being neighborly to you today, but I pray that you will join us in seeking to embody and pass on the neighborly heart of our Father today and maybe even tomorrow. Who knows? Maybe he'll be gracious and give us that too. Until then, we love you. You can send us an email or click a button or tell a friend. And if you don't, tell them about Jesus, because that's better than A&D anyway.
Yes, it is.
We will talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.